The morning sun cast long shadows across the rocky terrain of the Afghan mountains as Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison checked his watch. His SEAL unit had been moving through the dangerous valley for 3 hours, their mission clear but deadly. Intelligence reports indicated a high-value target was hiding in a compound just 2 clicks ahead. What the reports failed to mention was the spider web of enemy fighters that had been watching their every move since dawn. Morrison's team consisted of 8 highly trained operators, each man a specialist in his own right. There was Chief Petty Officer Marcus "Tank" Rodriguez, the heavy weapons expert whose calm demeanor never wavered under fire. Petty Officer First Class Danny Chun handled explosives with the precision of a surgeon. The youngest member, Petty Officer Second Class Tommy Williams, served as their communications specialist, his baby face hiding years of combat experience that belied his 24 years. The team moved in a tactical formation through the narrow canyon, their boots making barely a whisper against the loose stones. Morrison felt the familiar weight of responsibility on his shoulders. These men had followed him through countless operations in Iraq and Afghanistan. They trusted him with their lives, and he had never let them down. Today felt different, though. The intelligence seemed too clean, too perfect. Staff Sergeant Sarah Mitchell crouched behind a boulder 800 meters away, her Barrett M82A1 sniper rifle trained on the valley below. She had been tracking the SEAL team's movement for the past hour, not as an enemy, but as their guardian angel. Sarah was part of a special reconnaissance unit that provided overwatch for high-priority missions. Her spotter, Corporal James "Hawk" Peterson, lay beside her with high-powered binoculars, scanning for threats. Sarah had earned her place among the elite through sheer determination and skill. Growing up in rural Montana, she had learned to shoot before she could ride a bike. Her father, a veteran Marine, taught her that a rifle was a tool of precision, not violence. She carried that philosophy into the Army, where she quickly distinguished herself as one of the finest marksmen in her unit. But being a female sniper in a male-dominated field meant she constantly had to prove herself. The compound Morrison's team was approaching, set in a natural bowl surrounded by rocky ridges. It was a tactically sound position for defense, which made Morrison uneasy. His instincts, honed by years of special operations, were screaming warnings. He held up a closed fist, bringing his team to a halt. Using hand signals, he directed Tank and Chun to scout the left flank while Williams and the others checked the right approach. What Morrison didn't know was that they had walked into a carefully orchestrated trap. The high-value target was indeed in the compound, but he was bait. For weeks, enemy forces had been moving fighters into position around this valley, waiting for exactly this type of operation. Over 60 insurgents were now positioned on the ridges above, armed with everything from AK-47s to rocket-propelled grenades. Sarah adjusted her scope and noticed movement on the eastern ridge. Through her lens, she could see muzzle flashes glinting in the sunlight as fighters moved into position. Her heart rate remained steady, her breathing controlled. She had made shots at this distance before, but never with so many American lives depending on her accuracy. She touched her radio headset and whispered to her command post. The first shots came from 3 different directions simultaneously. Morrison's team found themselves caught in a deadly crossfire as bullets began kicking up dirt around their positions. Tank immediately returned fire with his M249 saw, sending controlled bursts toward the muzzle flashes on the northern ridge. Chun rolled behind a fallen tree trunk, his M4 carbine barking as he engaged targets to the east. Morrison quickly assessed their situation. They were pinned down in the open with minimal cover, facing an enemy force that clearly outnumbered them and held the high ground. He grabbed his radio and called for immediate extraction, but Williams shook his head grimly. The communications equipment had taken a hit in the initial volley. They were on their own. Sarah watched the firefight unfold below through her scope. She could see the SEAL team's desperate situation clearly. The enemy had positioned themselves brilliantly, creating overlapping fields of fire that left the Americans with nowhere to run. She began selecting targets, starting with the machine gun nest that posed the greatest immediate threat to Morrison's men. Her first shot echoed across the valley like thunder. 800 meters away, an insurgent manning a PKM machine gun pitched forward, his weapon falling silent. Sarah worked a bolt of her rifle smoothly, ejecting the spent brass and chambering a fresh round. Her next target was a sniper positioned on the western ridge who had Morrison pinned behind a small boulder. The battle intensified as more enemy fighters revealed their positions. Morrison realized they were facing a much larger force than anticipated. His men were running low on ammunition, and several had already taken minor wounds from flying rock fragments and near misses. The situation was becoming desperate. Tank's machine gun suddenly jammed at the worst possible moment. As he worked frantically to clear the malfunction, 3 insurgents began advancing on their position from the north. Morrison and Williams laid down covering fire, but they were vastly outnumbered. The enemy was closing in, and extraction seemed impossible from her elevated position. Sarah could see the full scope of the trap. The SEAL team was surrounded on all sides with nowhere to retreat. Enemy fighters were moving to flank them from multiple directions, and it was only a matter of time before they would be overrun. She made a decision that would either save 8 American lives or expose her own position to deadly retaliation. Sarah began engaging targets in rapid succession, her rifle speaking with deadly precision. Each shot was carefully calculated, each target selected for maximum tactical impact. She focused on the fighters who posed the greatest threat to Morrison's escape routes, creating corridors of safety in the deadly crossfire that surrounded the SEAL area as the sun climbed higher in the Afghan sky. The battle for survival was just beginning. Morrison and his men fought with the desperation of cornered warriors, while Sarah Mitchell prepared to take the most difficult shots of her military career. The next few hours would test everyone's limits and determine whether 8 of America's finest would make it home alive. The crack of Sarah's rifle continued to echo across the valley as she methodically eliminated threats from her concealed position. Each shot required split-second calculations for wind, distance, and target movement. Her spotter hawk called out corrections and identified new targets, but Sarah's focus remained razor-sharp. Despite the chaos unfolding below, Morrison felt the pressure around his team beginning to ease slightly as enemy fire became less coordinated. He didn't know about the guardian angel on the ridge above, but his tactical mind recognized that something had shifted in their favor. Several enemy positions that had been raining death on his men had suddenly gone quiet. He seized the opportunity to reorganize his defense. Tank finally cleared his weapon malfunction and resumed laying down suppressive fire on the eastern ridge. His experience showed as he fired in controlled bursts, conserving ammunition while keeping enemy heads down. Chun had found a better position behind a larger boulder and was picking off targets with his M4. His steady breathing keeping his shots accurate despite the stress of combat. Young Williams, despite the fear coursing through his veins, continued trying to re-establish communications with their base. The radio equipment had taken damage, but he refused to give up. These men depended on air support and extraction, and he was their only link to the outside world. As bullets whined overhead, he worked with the desperate focus of a man who knew lives hung in the balance. Sarah identified a new threat that made her blood run cold. Through her scope, she could see insurgents setting up a mortar position on the southern ridge. If that weapon became operational, Morrison's team would be wiped out in minutes. The distance was extreme, nearly 1,000 meters, and the targets were partially concealed behind rocks. It would be the most difficult shot of her career. She adjusted her scope for the extended range and calculated the ballistics in her head. The thin mountain air would affect bullet trajectory, and the afternoon wind was beginning to pick up. Sarah controlled her breathing, feeling her heartbeat slow as she entered the zone that separated good snipers from legendary ones. Her finger found the trigger as she aligned the crosshairs on the insurgent, loading mortar rounds. The shot seemed to hang in the air forever before finding its target. The insurgent dropped, but Sarah was already working her bolt and shifting to the second target. The remaining mortar crew scrambled for cover, abandoning their weapon. The immediate threat was neutralized. But Sarah knew more enemies were moving to replace fallen comrades. Morrison's team had been fighting for over 2 hours when Williams finally managed to raise their base on the damaged radio. The signal was weak and broken, but he transmitted their coordinates and situation report. The response was not encouraging. Air support was still 30 minutes away due to other operations in the area. The SEAL team would have to hold their position and survive until help arrived. The ammunition situation was becoming critical. Each man was down to his last few magazines, and enemy fire was intensifying as more fighters arrived to reinforce the attack. Morrison made the hardest decision of his military career. He ordered his men to begin rationing their shots, firing only when they had clear targets. It was a gamble that could cost them everything. Sarah watched the developing crisis through her scope and realized the SEAL team was running out of options. Her own ammunition was also running low after nearly 100 precision shots. She had perhaps 20 rounds remaining, and each one would have to count. Hawk reported movement from multiple directions as enemy reinforcements continued arriving. New threat emerged from the western ridge as insurgents with rocket-propelled grenades moved into position. Sarah could see them preparing to fire on Morrison's location. The range was manageable, but the targets were moving quickly between cover points. She would have one chance to stop them before they launched their deadly payload. Her first shot dropped the RPG gunner just as he raised the weapon to his shoulder. The rocket-propelled grenade fell harmlessly among the rocks, but the second insurgent immediately moved to recover it. Sarah's follow-up shot caught him in the chest before he could reach the weapon. The immediate threat was ended, but she knew more would follow. Tank took shrapnel in his left arm when an enemy grenade landed near his position. Despite the pain, he continued operating his machine gun with grim determination. June moved to provide medical aid while maintaining his own rate of fire. The SEAL team's discipline and training showed as they adapted to each new crisis without panic. Morrison coordinated their defense with the calm professionalism that had made him one of the Navy's most respected special operations leaders. He moved between his men's positions, redistributing ammunition and providing tactical guidance. Every decision carried life or death consequences, but he never hesitated or showed uncertainty. Sarah's position was becoming increasingly dangerous as enemy fighters began to triangulate on her muzzle flashes. Several rounds had already impacted near her hide site, and she knew it was only a matter of time before they found her range. Hawk urged her to relocate, but moving would abandon the SEAL team to almost certain death. The afternoon sun was beginning its descent toward the mountains when Sarah faced her most crucial decision. She had identified the enemy commander directing the assault from a protected position on the northern ridge. Taking that shot would require exposing herself completely. As the angle demanded, she moved from her concealed position to an open. Rocky OUTCR Williams finally received confirmation that air support was inbound, but the closest aircraft were still 15 minutes away. Morrison knew his team couldn't hold out much longer with their dwindling ammunition and the mounting enemy pressure. Several of his men were wounded, and their defensive perimeter was shrinking under constant attack. Sarah made her choice. She low-crawled to the exposed position, knowing that enemy snipers were actively hunting for her. The shot to the enemy commander would be difficult enough without the added pressure of certain retaliation. As she settled into her new firing position, Hawk provided cover with his own weapon. Through her scope, Sarah could see the enemy leader clearly for the first time. He was using a radio to coordinate the assault, directing fighters to exploit weaknesses in the SEAL team's defense. Taking him out would disrupt their entire operation, but the shot was nearly impossible. The target was at maximum range, partially concealed, and constantly moving. Sarah felt the familiar calm settle over her as she prepared for the most important shot of her life. 8 American heroes were depending on her accuracy, and failure was not an option. She controlled her breathing, calculated the shot, and slowly began applying pressure to the trigger. Sarah's finger found the trigger as she steadied her breathing one final time. The enemy commander was over 900 meters away, moving between covered positions while directing his fighters through hand signals and radio commands. The wind had picked up, adding another variable to an already impossible shot. She had one opportunity before enemy snipers would zero in on her exposed position. The Barrett rifle bucked against her shoulder as the .50 caliber round left the barrel at nearly 3,000 feet per second. Sarah immediately began moving as enemy bullets started impacting around her previous position. She had learned long ago never to stay in one place after taking a long-range shot. Through the dust and chaos, she couldn't immediately confirm whether her shot had found its target. Hawk confirmed the hit through his binoculars. The enemy commander had dropped behind his rocky cover and wasn't moving. Within minutes, the coordinated assault on Morrison's position began to falter as fighters lost their tactical direction. The disciplined attack dissolved into random, uncoordinated fire from multiple positions. Morrison noticed the change immediately. The enemy fire became sporadic and unfocused, giving his team precious breathing room. He seized the opportunity to consolidate his men's positions and redistribute their remaining ammunition. Tank's arm wound was bleeding steadily, but the tough Marine refused medical attention until the fight was over. Williams received an update that air support was now only 8 minutes away. 2 Apache attack helicopters were inbound along with a medical evacuation bird. Morrison felt the first glimmer of hope they had experienced since the ambush began. His team just needed to hold on a little longer. Sarah had relocated to a new firing position, but her ammunition was nearly exhausted. She counted only 7 rounds remaining in her magazine with no additional ammunition available. Each shot would have to eliminate a critical threat or help create an escape route for the surrounded SEAL team. The pressure of that responsibility weighed heavily on her shoulders. Enemy fighters began attempting to flank Morrison's position from the south, where the terrain offered better concealment. Sarah spotted the movement and realized this was their most dangerous threat yet. If those insurgents reached the SEAL team's flank, the Americans would be completely overrun before air support could arrive. She selected her targets carefully, choosing the fighters who posed the greatest immediate danger. Her sixth-to-last shot dropped the lead insurgent as he emerged from cover. The following round caught his second-in-command before he could retreat to safety. The flanking maneuver stalled as the remaining fighters went to ground. Chun was running dangerously low on ammunition when an enemy fighter appeared suddenly among the rocks to his right. Before Chang could swing his weapon around, the insurgent was already raising his AK-47. Time seemed to slow as Chun realized he wouldn't be fast enough to prevent his own death. Sarah's shot came from 800 meters away, striking the insurgent center mass just as his finger found the trigger. Chun felt the bullet pass inches from his head before realizing what had happened. Somewhere on the ridges above, an unknown marksman was protecting them with incredible skill and precision. Morrison began planning their extraction as the sound of approaching helicopters reached his ears. The Apache gunships would need clear fields of fire to engage the enemy positions effectively. He started identifying targets and escape routes, preparing to guide the air support to maximum effect. The first Apache appeared over the eastern ridge like an avenging angel, its 30mm chain gun already rotating toward enemy positions. The pilot had been briefed on the SEAL team's location and immediately began engaging threats on the northern ridge. The distinctive sound of the chain gun echoed across the valley as high explosive rounds tore into insurgent positions. Sarah watched the air support arrive with relief, but she knew the danger wasn't over yet. Enemy fighters were already adapting to the new threat, seeking deeper cover and preparing anti-aircraft weapons. Through her scope, she spotted a team setting up a shoulder-fired missile system aimed at the lead Apache helicopter, with only 3 rounds remaining. Sarah faced an impossible choice. The missile team was at maximum range for her weapon, and the shot would require perfect execution. Missing would mean the loss of the helicopter and possibly Morrison's entire team. The pressure was enormous, but she had trained for moments exactly like this. She steadied her rifle and began her final calculations. Wind speed, range, target movement, and ballistic trajectory all had to be perfect. The insurgent with the missile launcher was moving into firing position, and Sarah had perhaps 10 seconds before he would engage the helicopter. Her shot thundered across the valley, and she immediately shifted to the second target without waiting to confirm the hit. Her penultimate round caught the spotter just as he was calling out range information to the missile operator. The anti-aircraft threat was neutralized. With only one round remaining in her rifle, the second Apache had arrived and was engaging targets on the western ridge, while the medical evacuation helicopter circled at a safe distance, waiting for the landing zone to be cleared. Morrison coordinated with the pilots, directing their fire onto the most dangerous enemy positions while preparing his team for extraction. Tank was losing blood steadily from his shrapnel wounds but continued operating his machine gun with determined professionalism. June had moved to assist him while Williams maintained communications with the air support. Young Williams had proven himself under fire, never wavering despite the terrifying circumstances. Sarah realized that enemy snipers had finally located her position as bullets began striking uncomfortably close to her hide site. She had one round left and multiple threats still active throughout the valley. The choice of which target to engage would determine whether she and the SEAL team survived the next few minutes. Through her scope, she identified an insurgent with an RPG taking aim at the medical evacuation helicopter. The pilot was focused on finding a safe landing spot and might not see the threat in time. Sarah's last shot would have to count, and the range was at the absolute limit of her weapon's effectiveness. As she prepared for her final shot, Sarah reflected on the path that had brought her to this moment. From the Montana ranch where she had learned to shoot to this Afghan mountainside where 8 lives depended on her skill. Every training exercise and qualification course had prepared her for this single trigger pull. The Barrett rifle fired its last round as Sarah made the most important shot of her military career. Below in the valley, Morrison prepared to extract his team under the protection of the circling gunships. The battle was reaching its climax, and survival would depend on perfect execution in the next critical minutes. Sarah's final shot streaked across the valley and found its target. Just as the insurgent's finger tightened on the RPG trigger, the rocket launcher fell from dead hands, its deadly cargo unfired. The medical evacuation helicopter continued its approach, unaware of how close it had come to destruction. Sarah's rifle was now empty, but her mission was far from complete. Morrison coordinated with the Apache pilots as they systematically cleared the landing zone. The chain guns thundered continuously, sending streams of 30mm rounds into enemy positions. Rocks and debris flew through the air as the high explosive rounds tore apart the insurgents' cover. The overwhelming firepower of the attack helicopters was finally turning the tide of battle. With air support providing cover, Morrison began moving his team toward the designated landing zone. Tank required assistance due to his wounds, but he insisted on carrying his own weapon. Chun supported him while Williams gathered their remaining equipment. Every man understood that reaching the extraction point was only the first step in getting home alive. Sarah and Hawk began their own extraction from their exposed position. Enemy snipers had triangulated their location, and staying any longer would be suicide. They gathered their equipment and began moving carefully down the reverse slope of their ridge, using the terrain to mask their movement from hostile eyes. The medical helicopter pilot, Chief Warrant Officer Linda Santos, was a veteran of dozens of combat extractions. She brought her aircraft in low and fast, flaring at the last moment to settle into the small clearing Morrison had selected. Her crew chief immediately began scanning for threats while the medic prepared to treat wounded personnel. Morrison's team reached the landing zone as enemy fire intensified around them. The insurgents realized their prey was escaping and mounted a desperate final assault. Bullets kicked up dust around the helicopter as the SEAL team approached. But the Apache gunships responded immediately, suppressing the enemy fire with devastating effect. Tank was the first man loaded onto the medical helicopter, his wounds requiring immediate attention. The flight medic quickly established in 4 and began treating the shrapnel injuries while the crew chief provided security. Despite his pain, Tank maintained his grip on his weapon, ready to fight until the last moment. Chun and Williams boarded next, followed by the rest of the team. Morrison was the last man to climb aboard, following the warriors' code that leaders never abandon their position until all their men are safe. As the helicopter lifted off, he watched the battlefield below. Knowing they had survived against impossible odds, Sarah and Hawk were making their way carefully down the mountain when they encountered a group of insurgents moving to intercept the evacuation helicopter. The enemy fighters hadn't seen them yet, but they were positioned to fire on the medical bird as it climbed to safety. Sarah's rifle was empty, but Hawk carried an M4 carbine with limited ammunition. The helicopter gained altitude slowly, heavy with its load of wounded personnel and equipment. Chief Santos pushed her aircraft to its limits, but the thin mountain air reduced its performance significantly. They were vulnerable for several more minutes as they climbed toward safe flying altitude. Hawk engaged the insurgent patrol with precise rifle fire, dropping 2 fighters before the others realized they were under attack. Sarah drew her sidearm and moved to flank the enemy position while Hawk kept their heads down with suppressive fire. Their success in the mountains had depended on teamwork, and this final engagement would be no different. The remaining insurgents returned fire, forcing Sarah and Hawk to take cover among the rocks. Bullets sparked off stone surfaces around them as they maneuvered for better positions. Sarah realized they were outnumbered and running low on ammunition, but they couldn't allow the enemy to engage the vulnerable helicopter. One of the Apache pilots spotted the firefight on the mountainside and immediately diverted to provide support. His 30mm cannon spoke with authority, sending explosive rounds into the insurgent position. The enemy fighters were caught in the open and decimated by the overwhelming firepower of the attack helicopter. Morrison watched the action below, through the medical helicopter's window, understanding that someone on that mountainside had saved his team. The precision marksmanship that had protected them throughout the battle was no accident. A skilled sniper had been watching over them, making impossible shots under extreme pressure. Sarah and Hawk used the Apache's covering fire to break contact with any remaining enemies and continue their extraction. They moved quickly but carefully, knowing that other insurgent groups might be converging on their location. The sound of battle was fading behind them as the helicopters departed the valley with their precious cargo. Chief Santos flew her helicopter through a narrow mountain pass, using the terrain to mask their departure from potential surface-to-air missiles. Her skill and experience showed as she navigated the treacherous terrain, while her medic worked to stabilize Tank's injuries. The veteran crew chief maintained security, scanning constantly for threats. The Apache helicopters remained in the area, hunting for any remaining enemy forces that might threaten other friendly units. Their pilots coordinated with ground commanders, providing intelligence on insurgent movements and capabilities. The valley that had been a death trap for Morrison's team was now a killing field for enemy fighters. Morrison felt the weight of command settling on his shoulders as they flew toward the forward operating base. 8 of his men had entered that valley, and 8 were leaving alive. It was more than many units could claim after such an intense engagement. He knew they owed their lives to superior training, teamwork, and the mysterious guardian angel who had protected them. Williams finally allowed himself to relax as they reached safe altitude and distance from the battlefield. The young communications specialist had performed flawlessly under fire, maintaining their only link to salvation. His steady nerves and technical expertise had been crucial to their survival. Tank remained conscious despite his wounds, joking weakly with the flight medic about the quality of enemy marksmanship. His courage and determination had inspired the entire team during their darkest moments. The machine gunner's suppressive fire had kept enemy heads down when accurate shooting was the difference between life and death. Chun checked his equipment and weapons with the methodical care that had made him one of the team's most reliable operators. His explosive expertise and steady rifle work had eliminated multiple threats throughout the engagement. Like all special operations personnel, he was already thinking about lessons learned and improvements for future missions. As the helicopter approached the landing zone at their forward operating base, Morrison began composing his after-action report mentally. The intelligence failure that had led them into the trap would need investigation. More importantly, he needed to identify and thank the sniper team that had saved their lives. Sarah and Hawk continued their careful descent toward their own extraction point, where a different helicopter would recover them safely. Their mission was complete, but Sarah knew the images from that valley would stay with her forever. She had taken life to preserve life, using her skills to protect fellow warriors who never knew she existed. The medical helicopter touched down at Forward Operating Base Chapman as medical personnel rushed to meet the incoming wounded. Tank was quickly transferred to a gurney and wheeled toward the field hospital, conscious and alert despite his injuries. The base medical team had been briefed on his condition during the flight and was prepared to provide immediate care. Morrison debriefed with the base commander while his men received medical attention and equipment replacement. The intelligence failure that had nearly cost 8 lives demanded immediate investigation. The enemy had known about their mission in advance, suggesting either compromised communications or human intelligence sources within their operational area. Dr. Sarah Chun, the base surgeon, worked efficiently to remove shrapnel from Tank's arm and shoulder. The tough Marine remained stoic throughout the procedure, more concerned about his teammates than his own wounds. His injuries were serious but not life-threatening, and he would recover fully with proper care and rehabilitation. Williams underwent evaluation for potential hearing damage from the intense firefight. The young communications specialist had performed heroically under pressure, but the constant gunfire and explosions had taken their toll. The medical staff wanted to ensure no permanent damage had occurred to his hearing, which was crucial for his specialized role. Chun and the other team members were cleared medically, but remained for observation and debriefing. Each man provided detailed accounts of the engagement, helping intelligence analysts piece together the scope and sophistication of the enemy ambush. Their professional approach to debriefing reflected their training and experience. Sarah and Hawk reached their extraction point as darkness fell across the Afghan mountains. A special operations helicopter picked them up without incident, and they returned to their base several hours after the main engagement ended. Their equipment showed the wear of extended combat operations, but both operators were uninjured. At her base, Sarah underwent her own debriefing with intelligence officers eager to understand the tactical picture from her elevated observation post. She provided detailed information about enemy positions, numbers, and capabilities that would prove valuable for future operations in the region. Her professional demeanor masked the emotional impact of the day's events. Morrison received a secure phone call that evening from a colonel he had never met. The conversation was brief but significant. Someone at a very high level wanted to arrange a meeting between the SEAL team and their guardian angels. The mysterious sniper team would finally be identified and properly thanked. Tank was resting comfortably in the base hospital when Morrison visited that evening. Despite his bandages and 4 lines, the machine gunner was already asking when he could return to duty. His dedication to his team and mission reflected the warrior ethos that defined special operations personnel throughout all branches of the military. The intelligence analysis revealed disturbing information about the enemy ambush. Over 70 insurgent fighters had participated in the operation, supported by sophisticated communications and coordination. The trap had been planned for weeks, specifically targeting American Special Operations Forces operating in that region. Sarah found sleep difficult that night, despite her exhaustion from the day's events. The images of the firefight played repeatedly in her mind as she processed the emotional aftermath of combat. She had saved 8 lives through her marksmanship, but taking life, even enemy life, carried psychological weight that training could only partially prepare her for. Morrison called his wife from the secure communications facility, unable to share details of the mission, but needing to hear her voice. The near-death experience reminded him of what mattered most beyond military service. His family deserved to know he was safe, even if they couldn't know how close he had come to never coming home. The next morning brought new intelligence about the mysterious sniper team that had saved Morrison's unit. Staff Sergeant Sarah Mitchell and Corporal James Peterson were identified as Army Special Reconnaissance operators assigned to provide overwatch for high-priority missions. Their service records revealed extensive combat experience and exceptional marksmanship qualifications. Colonel James Harrison, the base commander, personally approved the meeting between the 2 units. Such recognition was rare in the classified world of special operations where heroes often remained anonymous to protect operational security. The exceptional circumstances of this mission warranted breaking normal protocols. Sarah learned about the planned meeting through her commanding officer, Major Lisa Rodriguez. The Major explained that the SEAL team leadership specifically requested the opportunity to thank their protectors personally. Such meetings were unusual, but reflected the close bonds formed between warriors who had shared life-or-death experiences. Williams spent the morning repairing and testing communication equipment, ensuring their next mission wouldn't suffer from technical failures. His methodical approach to equipment maintenance had been crucial during the firefight, and he was determined to prevent any future communications problems that might endanger his teammates. Sheen inventoried their ammunition expenditure from the engagement, noting that each team member had fired nearly every round they carried. The intensity and duration of the firefight had pushed their equipment and supplies to the limits. His analysis would help improve loadout. Planning for future operations. Tank was released from the hospital with his arm in a sling but otherwise ready for duty. His wounds would require several weeks of healing, but the tough Marine was already planning his return to full operational status. The team's medic would monitor his recovery while ensuring he didn't push too hard too soon. The meeting was scheduled for that afternoon in a secure conference room at the base headquarters. Morrison prepared his remarks carefully, knowing that words could never adequately express his gratitude for what Sarah and Hawk had done. Their precision marksmanship had made the difference between survival and disaster for his entire team. Sarah cleaned and inspected her rifle that morning, a ritual that helped her process the events of the previous day. The Barrett M82A1 had performed flawlessly throughout the engagement, delivering precise shots at extreme range under difficult conditions. Her trust in the weapon was absolute, but she still verified every component. Hawk completed his own equipment maintenance while reflecting on their role in the mission. As a spotter, his contributions were often overlooked, but Sarah knew his. Range calculations and target identification had been crucial to her success. Their partnership represented the teamwork that defined special operations excellence. The intelligence community was already analyzing the lessons learned from the mission, seeking to prevent similar ambushes in the future. The enemy's sophisticated planning and execution demonstrated evolving threats that required adaptive tactics and improved intelligence gathering capabilities. Morrison's team gathered in their quarters that morning, each man dealing with the psychological aftermath of combat in his own way. Some cleaned weapons repeatedly, others wrote letters home, and a few simply sat quietly processing the experience. Their survival had created bonds that would last long after their military service ended. As afternoon approached, both units prepared for a meeting that would formally recognize the extraordinary events in that Afghan valley. The heroes who had saved 8 lives were about to meet the warriors whose lives they had preserved. It would be a moment that defined the brotherhood of arms that transcended all branches of military service. The conference room at Forward Operating Base. Chapman was unusually quiet as 2 groups of warriors prepared to meet for the first time. Morrison and his 7 team members sat on one side of the polished table, while Sarah and Hawk occupied chairs across from them. Between these 2 small units lay the invisible bond forged by shared combat and mutual sacrifice. Colonel Harrison opened the meeting with a brief summary of the previous day's engagement. His words were measured and professional, but the gravity of the situation was evident in his tone. 67 enemy fighters had been confirmed killed or wounded in the action. With minimal American casualties thanks to exceptional teamwork and marksmanship, Morrison stood first, his eyes moving between Sarah and Hawk as he struggled to find adequate words. These 2 soldiers had watched over his team like guardian angels, making impossible shots under extreme pressure while remaining invisible to the enemy. Their skill and dedication had saved 8 lives without any expectation of recognition or reward. Sarah felt uncomfortable with the attention, her natural modesty making the praise difficult to accept. She had done her job, nothing more and nothing less. The training and discipline instilled by years of military service had prepared her for exactly this type of situation. In her mind, any competent sniper would have acted similarly. Tank spoke next, his voice still hoarse from shouting commands during the firefight. He described the moment when enemy fire had suddenly become less accurate and coordinated, not knowing at the time that Sarah's precision shooting was systematically eliminating threats around his position. His gratitude was evident in every word. Williams shared his perspective from the communications role, explaining how the mysterious reduction in enemy pressure had given him crucial time to repair damaged equipment and re-establish contact with their base. Without that breathing space, the team would have remained isolated and overwhelmed by superior enemy numbers. Chun described the tactical situation from his position, noting how enemy flanking movements had been repeatedly disrupted by accurate long-range fire. He had initially attributed the enemy failures to poor coordination, not realizing that an Army sniper was actively protecting his team from nearly a kilometer away. Hawk finally spoke, describing the view from the sniper hide site and the tactical challenges Sarah had faced throughout the engagement. The range, wind conditions, and target movement had made every shot extremely difficult. Her consistent accuracy under such pressure demonstrated exceptional skill and mental toughness. Colonel Harrison presented Sarah and Hawk with Bronze Star medals for their heroic actions, though the ceremony would remain classified due to operational security concerns. The medals represented formal recognition from a grateful nation, but both soldiers knew the real reward was seeing 8 American warriors return home alive. Sarah stood to address Morrison's team, her voice steady despite the emotional weight of the moment. She explained that their mission had been to provide overwatch and protection, nothing more complex than doing their assigned job to the best of their abilities. She deflected praise toward Hawk, whose spotting and range calculations had made her accurate shooting possible. The meeting continued for 2 hours as both units shared their perspectives on the engagement. Maps were spread across the table as participants reconstructed the timeline of events, identifying key moments when split-second decisions had determined the outcome. The professional discussion helped everyone process the traumatic experience. Morrison's team learned that Sarah had fired 97 rounds during the engagement, achieving an unprecedented hit rate at extreme range under combat conditions. Her ammunition had been completely exhausted by the final shot that eliminated the RPG threat to their extraction helicopter. Every round had been carefully placed for maximum tactical effect. Sarah discovered that Morrison's team had been operating with degraded intelligence, unaware of the massive enemy presence that awaited them in the valley. Their survival had depended entirely on superior training, teamwork, and the protective fire she had provided from her concealed position. The margin between success and disaster had been razor-thin. The psychological impact of the engagement became evident as team members discussed their experiences. Tank admitted that he had prepared for death during the most intense phase of the firefight. Williams confessed that fear had nearly overwhelmed him when their communications failed. Chun acknowledged that his ammunition had been nearly exhausted when air support arrived. Sarah shared her own emotional journey during the engagement, describing the pressure of making life-or-death decisions with every trigger pull. The weight of responsibility for 8 American lives had been enormous, but her training and natural ability had sustained her through the crisis. She had never wavered despite the impossible circumstances. The meeting concluded with Morrison presenting Sarah with his team's challenge coin, a tradition that recognized exceptional service and sacrifice. The coin bore the SEAL trident and team number, marking her as an honorary member of their brotherhood. Tears were visible in several eyes as the presentation was made. Hawk received a similar honor from Tank, who removed his own Purple Heart ribbon and pinned it to the spotter's uniform. The gesture recognized Hawk's courage in maintaining his position despite enemy fire that grew increasingly accurate as the battle progressed. His dedication had been crucial to Sarah's success. As the formal meeting ended, both units lingered in the conference room, reluctant to break the bonds formed by shared combat. Conversations continued in small groups as warriors compared equipment, tactics, and experiences. The artificial barriers between branches of service had been erased by mutual respect and gratitude. Sarah and Morrison exchanged contact information, beginning a friendship that would endure long after their military careers ended. They had shared something that few warriors experience, a perfect example of how individual courage and skill could overcome impossible odds when combined with teamwork and determination. That evening, both units gathered for an informal dinner in the base dining facility. Stories were shared, jokes were told, and the psychological healing process continued through the simple act of breaking bread together. The traumatic experience was transformed into a shared victory through the power of military brotherhood. Tank's arm was healing well, and doctors projected a full recovery within 6 weeks. His determination to return to duty reflected the warrior mentality that had sustained him through the firefight. The team would not be the same without their heavy weapons expert and steady influence. Williams had suffered minor hearing damage. That would require monitoring but would not affect his ability to serve. His performance under pressure had earned the respect of veteran operators, who had initially questioned his youth and experience. The communications specialist had proven himself worthy of their trust. Chun continued his meticulous maintenance of team equipment, ensuring they would be ready when the next mission came. His calm professionalism and technical expertise made him invaluable to the team's success. The explosive ordnance disposal specialist took pride in his contribution to their survival. Morrison submitted his after-action report that night, documenting the intelligence failure and enemy capabilities for future reference. His leadership throughout the crisis had been exemplary, keeping his team focused and organized despite overwhelming enemy pressure. The SEAL commander had upheld the highest traditions of naval special warfare. Sarah returned to her quarters and wrote a letter to her father in Montana, sharing what details she could about her recent mission. The veteran Marine would understand the significance of her actions even through the limited information she could provide. His training and guidance had prepared her for this moment. Hawk completed his own report, providing detailed intelligence about enemy tactics and capabilities observed during the engagement. His professional observations would help other reconnaissance teams prepare for similar threats in the future. The young soldier had proven himself worthy of his elite assignment. As night fell over the Afghan mountains, 2 small units of American warriors settled into their quarters with the satisfaction of duty well performed. They had faced impossible odds and emerged victorious through courage, skill, and mutual support. Their bond, forged in the crucible of combat, would endure for the rest of their lives. The valley where they had fought would see many more battles in the years to come, but none would match the intensity and heroism displayed on that particular day. 8 Navy SEALs had walked into a death trap and emerged alive, protected by 2 Army soldiers who had refused to abandon their post. Despite overwhelming danger, their story would be classified for decades, known only to a select few who understood its significance. But in the Brotherhood of Special Operations, where actions speak louder than words, Sarah Mitchell and James Peterson had earned a place among the legends. They had pulled triggers that no one else could pull, at a time when failure meant the death of 8 American heroes.